Anne, before we dive into this story that will change how you see love and family forever, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Drop your city name below. And while you're at it, hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and let's jump into our story. Mom, I'm so sorry. I never meant to lose you. These were the words whispered by a man in a $3,000 suit as he held the weathered hands of an elderly woman who sold vegetables on the street corner. But to understand how we arrived at this heart-shattering moment that moved millions to tears, we need to go back to the day when fate decided to orchestrate the most incredible reunion you'll ever witness. It was a crisp October morning in downtown Manhattan when the autumn breeze carried the scent of roasted chestnuts and car exhaust through the bustling streets. The city was alive with its usual symphony of honking horns, chattering pedestrians, and the distant rumble of subway trains beneath the concrete jungle. In the midst of this urban chaos, Rose Patterson slowly pushed her wooden cart down Fifth Avenue, her frail shoulders bearing the weight of crates filled with the freshest vegetables money could buy. Her hands, marked by 64 years of honest labor, gripped the cart's worn handles as her feet, protected only by canvas sneakers held together with duct tape, navigated the unforgiving sidewalk. Each step sent jolts of pain through her arthritic knees, but Rose never stopped. She couldn't stop. Those vibrant vegetables she carried, tomatoes red as precious rubies, onions that gleamed like pearls under the streetlights, lettuce leaves so green they seemed to glow with life, represented her only chance of earning the few dollars she needed to survive another day. But there was something deeper burning in Rose's amber eyes, something that went far beyond financial necessity. Behind the weariness and the wrinkles etched by decades of struggle, there flickered a flame of hope that had refused to die for 30 long years. A hope that kept her walking these same streets day after day with the secret prayer that somewhere, somehow, destiny would return what had been stolen from her, her son. Meanwhile, just 4 blocks away, Michael Harrison adjusted his limited edition Rolex and scanned the red numbers flashing across his phone screen. Another day, another $1 million profit. At 35, he had built a business empire that positioned him among the wealthiest men in America. His armored Bentley glided silently through the streets while he responded to emails from the leather back seat, completely oblivious to the world that existed beyond his tinted windows. Michael possessed everything money could purchase: penthouses overlooking Central Park, watches that cost more than most people's homes, clothing crafted by the finest tailors in Milan. Yet something in his steel blue gaze betrayed an emptiness that no bank account had ever been able to fill. It was the hollow stare of someone who had grown up without knowing where he came from, without ever seeing the face of the woman who brought him into this world, convinced he had been abandoned because he wasn't worth keeping. The traffic light at the intersection of 5th Avenue and 42nd Street showed 38 seconds of red when these two completely different worlds were about to collide in the most unexpected way imaginable. Rose seized those precious seconds to cross the busy avenue, pushing her heavy cart loaded with the day's harvest, while Michael glared impatiently through his window, irritated by the traffic that was making him late for his 11 o'clock board meeting. What happened next would forever alter both their lives. A delivery truck, racing to beat the changing light, swerved suddenly to avoid a taxi. The truck's horn blared so loudly that Rose startled and stumbled. Her cart tilted dangerously, and vegetables began spilling across the asphalt like colorful confetti, rolling directly into the path of Michael's Bentley. Michael's driver slammed the brakes to avoid crushing the scattered produce. Michael, who had been absorbed in his phone, looked up with visible annoyance. Through the windshield, he saw an elderly woman struggling to gather vegetables from the wet pavement, her worn coat soaked from the morning's earlier drizzle. His immediate reaction was pure irritation. Seriously? I have to be late because of this. Without a second thought, he stepped out of the car, letting the cool air hit his perfectly tailored Italian suit. His handmade leather shoes splashed through puddles as he approached Rose with a face transformed by anger. "Ma'am, can you explain what you're doing throwing garbage all over the street? Do you realize you almost damaged my vehicle?" The words shot from his mouth like ice-cold daggers, loaded with contempt and superiority. Rose looked up from the ground where she knelt, desperately trying to salvage her scattered vegetables. Her eyes filled with tears of humiliation as she stammered, "I'm so sorry, sir. It wasn't intentional. The vegetables slipped when that truck startled me." "Vegetables? You actually make a living doing this?" Michael gestured dismissively at the crushed tomatoes. "Do you have any idea how much it costs to repair paint damage from this food?" But then something happened that neither of them expected. When Rose reached for a bell pepper that had rolled near Michael's feet, the sleeve of her threadbare jacket slid up, revealing her left forearm. There, beneath the aged and sun-spotted skin, shone a birthmark in the shape of a perfect five-pointed star, about the size of a quarter. Michael froze completely. His heart began beating in a rhythm he had never experienced before, as if something deep inside him had awakened after years of dormancy. Without realizing it, he touched his own left forearm, where beneath the silk of his custom shirt, in the exact same location, lay an identical birthmark. A perfect star that he had carried his entire life like an unanswered question. The autumn air seemed to thicken around them. The sounds of the city faded into a distant murmur. Michael slowly knelt down, never taking his eyes off that mark he had seen thousands of times on his own arm, but never on anyone else's. "Excuse me," his voice came out broken, barely audible. "That mark, how long have you had it?" Rose looked at him with confusion while quickly pulling her sleeve down to cover the star. "The birthmark? Well, my whole life, sir. Why do you ask?" Michael felt the world spinning around him, words stuck in his throat as an avalanche of inexplicable emotions flooded through him. Without saying another word, he removed his expensive jacket and draped it over Rose's trembling shoulders. "Let me help you with these," he whispered, and began gathering the scattered vegetables with his own hands, not caring that his $2,000 suit was getting stained with mud and vegetable juice. Rose watched him in amazement. This young man who had treated her with such disdain just moments ago was now kneeling on the wet asphalt, collecting her vegetables as if they were precious gems. But there was something else in his eyes, something familiar that made her heart begin beating with a hope she hadn't dared to feel in 30 years. "What's your name?" Michael asked, as he carefully placed tomatoes back in her cart. "Rose. Rose Patterson." "And you, sir?" "Michael," he replied, and for the first time in years, he didn't add his adopted surname. "May I ask, do you have family?" Rose's eyes filled with fresh tears. "I had a son, a long time ago, but he was taken from me when he was just a little boy." Michael's heart stopped completely. "Taken from you?" "Yes, he was only 5 years old. His name was Mikey." Her voice cracked as she spoke that name she hadn't said aloud in decades. What happened next left them both speechless. Some inexplicable force compelled Michael to roll up his shirt sleeve, revealing the birthmark that he had hated his entire life, that perfect star that had always reminded him he was different, that he didn't belong anywhere. Rose brought both hands to her mouth, stifling a cry that had been building for 30 years. Her legs trembled so violently she had to lean against the car to keep from falling. "No, it can't be," she whispered through her tears. But what neither of them realized in that moment was that this impossible coincidence was only the beginning of a truth so devastating. It would change not only their lives, but their understanding of love, loss, and justice forever. The minutes that followed that revelation felt like an eternity. Michael and Rose stood there in the middle of Manhattan's busiest intersection, staring at each other as if they were seeing ghosts from a past that had been buried for 3 decades. Traffic continued flowing around them, but for these two souls, the entire world had come to a complete standstill. "Sir, may I?" May I touch your mark? Rose's voice trembled so badly the words were barely comprehensible. Without speaking, Michael extended his arm. When her weathered fingers made contact with the star-shaped birthmark on his skin, both of them felt an electric shock that traveled from head to toe. It was as if 30 years of separation were dissolving in a single moment. "Dear God, dear God," Rose repeated over and over while tracing the outline of the star with her fingertip. "It's identical, exactly like mine." Michael couldn't speak. His mind, accustomed to processing multi-million-dollar transactions and complex business deals, now couldn't form a single coherent sentence. Everything he had believed about his origins, every story he'd been told about his past, began crumbling like a house of cards in a hurricane. "Mrs. Patterson," he finally managed to say, "I need you to tell me everything about your son, everything you remember." Rose wiped her tears with the back of her hand and took a deep breath, as if she were about to open a treasure chest that had been locked for decades. "My little Mikey was the most beautiful child, with hair golden like wheat fields and eyes blue as the sky after a storm. He had this laugh that could fill an entire room, and he loved when I sang lullabies to help him fall asleep." Her voice softened with nostalgia. But there was something else. He had this particular habit of tugging his left earlobe whenever he got nervous or scared. He'd been doing it since he was a baby. Michael's pulse quickened. Without realizing it, his hand automatically moved toward his left earlobe, a nervous habit he'd maintained his entire life and had always felt embarrassed about during important business meetings. "What else do you remember?" he asked, his throat dry as sandpaper. "He had a small scar on his right knee from when he fell off his tricycle when he was 4, and he always slept clutching a stuffed elephant that I gave him for his 2nd birthday. It was grey with pink ears." Michael felt his legs growing weak. He vividly remembered a scar on his right knee, so faint that doctors told him he must have gotten it as a very young child. And somewhere in the depths of his memory, blurry but persistent, existed the image of a grey, stuffed elephant that had been his companion during his early years at the orphanage. "Mrs. Patterson, where did you lose your son?" Rose closed her eyes as if the words she was about to speak were knives piercing her heart. "I was working as a housekeeper for a very wealthy family here in the city, the Sterlings. Mr. Richard owned several corporations, and his wife Victoria had always been kind to me. When Mikey got pneumonia, they offered to pay all the hospital expenses." The name Sterling hit Michael like lightning. It was the surname of his adoptive parents, Richard and Victoria Sterling, who had raised him from age 12 until he became the man he was today. "What happened after that?" His voice came out as a hoarse whisper. "Mr. Richard told me I needed to sign some hospital paperwork so they could cover all the medical costs. I couldn't read very well back then." Tears began streaming down her cheeks. "I signed everything they put in front of me because I just wanted my baby to get better." Rose pressed her hands against her chest, as if breathing had become painful. "When Mikey recovered, I went to the hospital to bring him home, but they told me he wasn't there anymore. They said the papers I had signed transferred temporary custody to the Sterlings because I was too young and didn't have the means to care for him properly." "Were you too young?" Michael asked, confused. "No, sir. I was 24 years old. But on the paperwork, it said I was 17. I found out years later that they had falsified my birth date." Rage began building in Michael's chest like molten lava. The family he had admired and respected his entire life, the people he considered his saviors, might have been the architects of this woman's greatest tragedy. "What did you do when you found out?" "I ran to the Sterling mansion. I knocked on their door for hours, but the security guards told me they had moved and didn't know where. I searched the entire city, asked at hospitals, orphanages, churches. I spent every penny I had, hiring cheap lawyers who promised to find my son. But after months of empty promises, they all told me the case was hopeless because I had signed the papers voluntarily." Rose paused to wipe away tears that kept flowing like an endless river. "For 30 years, I've walked these streets selling vegetables. But the truth is, I've also been searching. Every young face I see, every blonde man who passes by, I wonder if it could be him. I wonder if my Mikey is alive, if he remembers me, if he knows that I never stopped looking for him. Michael felt his entire world collapsing piece by piece. Everything fit together in a terrifying way. The age, the name, the Sterling family, the birthmarks, the fragmented memories he had always attributed to childhood nightmares. Mrs. Patterson, can you tell me the exact date your son disappeared? October 15th, 1994. I'll never forget that date because it was the day my soul died. Michael felt the air escape from his lungs. According to his adoption records, he had arrived at St. Catherine's Orphanage on October 16th, 1994, one day later. I need time to process this, he murmured, while running his hands through his damp hair. But I can't leave you standing here in the cold. Please let me take you somewhere warm. Don't worry about me, sir. I'm used to it. No. His voice sounded firmer than it had all morning. Let me do this, please. Michael helped Rose into the Bentley, carefully loaded her vegetable cart into the trunk, and asked his driver to take them to the nearest upscale cafe. During the entire ride, neither spoke, but their hands found each other on the leather seat and remained intertwined, as if some magnetic force was keeping them connected. At the cafe, Michael ordered hot chocolate for both of them and watched as Rose held the porcelain cup with both hands, trying to warm herself. There was something about her gestures, the delicate way she blew on the surface of the chocolate before drinking, that awakened a buried memory in him. A young woman with dark hair cooling soup before feeding it to him with a small spoon. "Mrs. Patterson," he said finally, "do you believe in destiny?" She looked at him with eyes sparkling from unshed tears. "After 30 years of selling vegetables on the same corner where you almost ran me over today, after carrying this birthmark that reminds me of my son every single day, after keeping hope alive when everyone told me I was crazy, yes, sir, I believe destiny exists. Then I need to ask something of you. I need you to give me a few days to investigate some things. And I need you to trust me. Why should I trust you? I don't even know you." Michael rolled up his sleeve again and placed his forearm next to hers on the marble table. The two stars aligned perfectly, like puzzle pieces that had been incomplete for decades. "Because I believe there's a possibility that I'm your son. And if that's true, I need to uncover the truth. Not just for me, but for you. For the 30 years they stole from you." Rose covered her face with her hands and began sobbing with an intensity that made other cafe patrons turn to stare. But Michael felt no embarrassment. For the first time in his life, he felt he was exactly where he belonged. "But sir, you need to know something else. The Sterlings. They were the ones who adopted me when I was 12. If it turns out you're my mother, that means the people who raised me were the same ones who separated us." Rose's face hardened with an expression Michael had never seen before. It was a mixture of pain and determination that completely transformed her features. "If that's true, sir, then we need to make them pay for what they did. Not just to me, but to you too. Because if you're my son, then they also stole 30 years of a mother's love from you." Michael felt something ignite in his chest, something he had never experienced before. A thirst for justice that went beyond money or power. It was something primal, visceral, that awakened instincts he didn't know he possessed. "I'm going to hire the best private investigator in the country," he declared, "and we're going to uncover the entire truth, no matter how painful it might be. And if it turns out I'm not your mother, what if this is just a terrible coincidence?" Michael took Rose's weathered hands in his and looked directly into her eyes. "Then I'm going to help you find your real son. And I'm going to make sure you never have to sell vegetables in the rain to survive again. I promise you that." But what neither of them knew in that moment was that the truth they were about to uncover would be far more twisted and cruel than they could ever have imagined. and that the people responsible had built a wall of lies so elaborate that unraveling the truth would be like exhuming a corpse that had been rotting for 3 decades. 5 days after that life-changing encounter in the rain, Michael found himself in his corner office on the 48th floor, staring out at the Manhattan skyline that had always represented his conquest of the business world. On his mahogany desk lay a thick file that the most expensive private investigator in New York had delivered that morning. His hands trembled slightly as he turned page after page of information that would shatter the foundation of everything he had believed about his life. Detective James Collins, a 62-year-old man with 40 years of experience uncovering the darkest secrets of America's wealthiest families, sat across from him with a grim expression that Michael had never seen on any professional of his caliber. "Mr. Harrison," Collins began with a heavy voice, "in 4 decades of investigation, I've never encountered something as elaborately cruel as what we discovered about your case. What I'm about to tell you will forever change how you see the family that raised you." Michael closed his eyes and took a deep breath. "Tell me everything. Don't leave out a single detail." Richard and Victoria Sterling had been married for 9 years without being able to conceive a child when you entered their lives. Victoria had suffered multiple miscarriages, and doctors had diagnosed her with permanent infertility. This had plunged her into such severe depression that Richard feared for her mental stability and their marriage. The detective opened a folder filled with old photographs and medical documents. When Rose Patterson came to work for them in 1993, bringing along a 4-year-old boy, it became Victoria's obsession. According to testimonies from other domestic workers who were employed in that house, Victoria spent hours watching how Rose cared for little Michael. She reached the point of asking Rose to bring you to work every day because she said, "The house felt more complete with the sound of a child's laughter." Michael felt a knot forming in his stomach. The puzzle pieces were beginning to create a terrifying picture. "Continue," he whispered. "In September 1994, when you became ill with pneumonia, Victoria saw the perfect opportunity. She convinced Richard that Rose was an irresponsible mother who couldn't properly care for her child. She proposed a plan that Richard initially rejected, but which Victoria managed to implant in his mind through weeks of psychological manipulation." Collins pulled out an old recording device with a cassette tape. "We obtained this recording of a conversation between Victoria and her sister, Margaret, who died last year but had kept this evidence for decades. Margaret always knew what they had done and lived tormented by it. Before dying, she gave this tape to her daughter with instructions to make it public if anyone ever asked about Michael Patterson's case." With trembling hands, Michael pressed the play button. Victoria Sterling's voice, 30 years younger, filled the office like the echo of a nightmare. "Margaret, don't you understand? That child is wasting his life with that ignorant woman. Look at me. Look at everything Richard and I can give him. The best education, trips around the world, a brilliant future. Rose can barely feed him beans and bread. But Victoria, he's her son, her own flesh and blood. Her own son, who's going to end up being a failure just like her. Margaret, I've already talked to Richard. We have a plan. When the child is hospitalized, we're going to have Rose sign temporary custody transfer documents. She can't read well, so she won't realize what she's signing. Victoria, that's legal kidnapping. It's salvation. We're saving that child from a life of misery, and in the process, I'm saving my marriage and my sanity. Richard is considering divorce because of my obsession with having children. If we have Michael, everything will return to normal." Michael stopped the recording violently. His hands clenched into fists as a fury he had never experienced took control of every fiber of his being. "There's more," Collins continued. "After taking you from the hospital, they kept you hidden in a country house for 8 months while they forged documents to make you appear as an orphan. They created a completely new identity, Michael Harrison, supposed son of parents who died in a car accident. And Rose, What did they do when she came looking for me? Richard hired thugs to threaten her. They told her that if she continued searching for the child, they would accuse her of child abandonment and put her in prison. A woman without education, without resources, without family. She felt completely defenseless. The detective pulled out more photographs from the folder. They were images of Rose from 30 years ago, young and desperate, standing in front of the gates of St. Catherine's orphanage, with tears streaming down her face. But she never gave up. Look at this. Collins spread out hundreds of receipts yellowed by time. They were proof of all the cheap private investigators Rose had hired over the years, every dollar she had spent trying to find clues about her disappeared son. This woman spent every cent she earned for 30 years looking for you. She literally lived on bread and water to be able to pay detectives, bargain lawyers, even fortune tellers and charlatans, anyone who promised her a clue about her son. Michael stood up from his chair and walked to the window, trying to control the storm of emotions raging inside him. Below, on the streets, he could see the exact spot where he had met Rose, the place where destiny had decided to correct a 30-year injustice. "Where is Victoria now?" he asked in a voice he didn't recognize as his own. "She lives in the Upper East Side, in the same mansion where you grew up. After Richard died 3 years ago, she's maintained herself as a respectable widow in the most exclusive social circles. She does charity work, donates money to orphanages." Collins paused with loaded irony. "The hypocrisy is nauseating. I want to confront her, right now. Mr. Harrison, you need to mentally prepare for what's coming." According to our sources, Victoria never showed remorse for what she did. On the contrary, she's convinced she did both you and Rose a favor. Michael headed toward the door with determination, but Collins stopped him. "There's something else you need to know before seeing her." "What else could there be? Rose wasn't the only victim. We found evidence that the Sterlings did this same thing with 3 other children during the 1990s. They illegally adopted them and then sold them to foreign families when they got tired of playing house. The world stopped for Michael. The monstrosity of the people he had called parents for more than 20 years was deeper than he had ever imagined. The other children, where are they? One died in an accident in France at age 18. Another disappeared in Germany and was never heard from again. The third was found last year living on the streets of Los Angeles, completely destroyed by drugs and trauma. You were lucky, Mr. Harrison. Victoria really became attached to you and decided to keep you permanently." 2 hours later, Michael stood in front of the door of the house where he had grown up, where he had spent happy Christmases, where he had celebrated graduations and birthdays. But now, every brick of that construction seemed stained with blood and tears. Victoria opened the door with a smile that instantly vanished when she saw the expression on her adopted son's face. "Michael, darling, what a surprise. Is something wrong? You look very pale." "We need to talk, Victoria. And this time you're going to tell me the truth about how I came to this family." The color drained completely from Victoria's face. Her hands began trembling as she gripped the doorframe. I don't know what you're talking about, son." Michael pulled out the recorder with the tape of the conversation with her sister Margaret. "Are you really going to keep lying? After 30 years, are you really going to keep building this charade?" Victoria collapsed against the entrance hall wall as if she had received a physical blow. Tears began flowing from her eyes, while her legs trembled to the point of not being able to support her. "Michael, son, I can explain everything." "I'm not your son!" Michael's scream resonated throughout the house like a roar of pain and fury. "My mother is selling vegetables on the street because you stole me from her arms when I was a defenseless child." Victoria slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, sobbing in a way Michael had never seen. It was the cry of someone whose entire life was crumbling in real time. "It was for your own good. It was for your own good," she repeated between sobs. "That woman had nothing to offer you. We gave you education, opportunities, a life she never could have provided. You gave me a life built on the deepest pain a mother can experience." Michael knelt in front of her, forcing her to look him in the eyes. "Do you have any idea what it's like to spend 30 years searching for your child? Do you have any idea of the hell you turned Rose's life into? She was supposed to conform. She was supposed to find another man, have other children. She was his only son, her baby, and you snatched him away like he was a toy." Victoria looked up with red, swollen eyes. "Have you found her? Do you know who she is?" "Not only did I find her, I met her. And tomorrow I'm going to make sure the entire city knows exactly what kind of monsters the Sterlings are." But what Michael didn't know was that Victoria had one more card up her sleeve, a final secret she was about to reveal in her desperation. A secret that would make everything discovered so far seem like just the tip of the iceberg of an even more sinister conspiracy. Victoria wiped the tears from her face with the back of her hand and looked at Michael with an expression that mixed desperation with something resembling malice. "If you're going to destroy my life, then you need to know the whole truth, Michael, the entire truth." "I know enough. I know you stole me from my mother's arms." "No." Victoria slowly stood up, regaining some of her composure. "You don't know anything. Rose isn't the saint you think she is." Michael felt his blood turn to ice. "What are you talking about?" Rose knew exactly what she was signing. The words poured from Victoria's mouth like poison. "We offered her $75,000 to permanently transfer custody. It was a fortune for someone like her." "That's a lie." "Is it really? Then ask her why she never went to the police. Ask her why in 30 years she never filed a formal complaint. Ask her why she took the money and signed the papers without asking questions." The world began to sway beneath Michael's feet. For a few seconds, doubt seeped through the cracks in his certainty like toxic water. "You're lying. You're trying to manipulate me just like you manipulated Richard." Victoria walked to an antique desk and pulled out a folder that had been hidden for decades. "Here are the bank receipts, Michael. Here's proof that Rose cashed the $75,000 the same day she signed the custody transfer papers. And here," she pulled out a blurry photograph, "here she is a week later, buying new clothes and putting a down payment on a house." Michael took the documents with trembling hands. The numbers were there, in black and white. The dates matched. Rose's signature was unmistakable. "Why are you showing me this now?" "Because Rose came back." Victoria collapsed into a chair, suddenly looking every bit of her 62 years. "A week ago, I received a phone call. A woman's voice telling me, 'I know what you did to my son and I want my money.' I thought it was a random extortion, but when she described the star-shaped birthmark..." "Rose called you?" "She asked for more money, Michael. She told me that if I didn't give her 100,000 more, she would tell the whole story to the media. She said she had been preparing for this moment for 30 years. Michael's mind was a hurricane of confusion and pain. Everything he had believed, all the feelings he had developed toward Rose, swayed like a building in an earthquake. "No, it can't be true. Why do you think she accidentally found you at that exact intersection? Why do you think she coincidentally stumbled right in front of your car?" Victoria approached him with eyes bright with desperation. "Everything was planned, son. Everything." Michael left Victoria's house like a man possessed. His driver took him directly to the small apartment where he had set Rose up 3 days earlier. He climbed the stairs 2 at a time, his heart pounding so loud he could hear it in his ears. When Rose opened the door, her face lit up with the purest smile Michael had seen in his entire life. "Mikey, how are you, sweetheart? I was just making your favorite dinner, vegetable soup with... Did you take money for me?" The words came out of his mouth like a slap. The smile vanished from Rose's face instantly, her eyes filled with confusion and pain. What are you saying, son?" Michael pulled out the documents Victoria had given him. $75,000. You cashed them the same day you sold me to the Sterlings." Rose took the papers with trembling hands. Her eyes scanned the numbers over and over, while tears began flowing uncontrollably. No. This can't be. Did you cash them or didn't you? Yes, I cashed them, but what? But you needed the money more than you needed your son? Rose collapsed into a chair and covered her face with her hands. Her crying was so heartbreaking that neighbors began knocking on the walls. Let me explain. Please, let me explain. The 30 years pretending you were looking for me when you had actually sold me. I didn't sell you. Rose jumped up with a fierceness Michael had never seen in her. I never sold you. Then explain this. Michael threw the papers on the floor. Explain why you have your signature on a receipt for $75,000. Rose breathed deeply and wiped her tears. When she spoke, her voice had a strength that completely transformed her appearance. Because I needed that money to hire the best lawyer in the country to get you back. Michael froze completely. What? When they told me you had been legally adopted and that I had signed the papers voluntarily, I knew I needed professional help. The $75,000 they gave me supposedly as compensation for hospital expenses. I used to hire attorney Benjamin Walsh, the only lawyer who agreed to review my case. Rose walked to her old dresser and pulled out a shoebox filled with yellow documents. Here are all the receipts, son. Every dollar of those $75,000 went to legal fees, private investigators, travel expenses to other states looking for you. Michael took the box with trembling hands. Inside were hundreds of receipts, payments to lawyers, detectives, even psychics and charlatans, all dated from 1994 to the previous year. Attorney Walsh explained to me that the papers I signed were fraudulent, but that proving fraud after 8 months would be nearly impossible. He told me we would need more money, more time, more evidence. Why didn't you ever tell me this? Because I was afraid you would think I had sold you. I was afraid that the money would taint the purity of my search. Rose took Michael's hands in hers. That money was my curse for 30 years. Every dollar I spent reminded me that it had come to me as the price of losing you. Michael felt the world reorganizing itself beneath his feet. Victoria's final manipulation had been as cruel as all the previous ones, using half-truths to destroy the only pure relationship he had found in his life. Rose, forgive me. Victoria manipulated me one more time. You have nothing to forgive, son. 30 years of separation can't be healed in 3 days. It's natural for you to have doubts. That night, sitting at the small kitchen table in Rose's apartment, sharing a bowl of vegetable soup made with her own hands, Michael finally allowed himself to feel something he had never experienced: the unconditional love of a true mother. You know what's strangest? Michael said while Rose served him more coffee. What, sweetheart? My entire life, even being a billionaire, I was always hungry for something I couldn't name. Hungry for home, hungry for belonging. And now, eating soup in this small apartment, it's the first time I feel completely satisfied. Rose smiled through tears. That's because you're finally eating with a mother's love, little Mikey. The months that followed were of complete transformation. Michael not only moved Rose to a beautiful house, but completely transformed his business empire. He created the Rose Patterson Foundation to reunite separated families, established a free legal fund for mothers victims of injustice, and began investigating and dismantling illegal adoption networks throughout the country. Victoria was prosecuted and sentenced to 18 years in prison. She lost all her assets, which were transferred to a compensation fund for the families she had destroyed. But the most powerful moment was when, on the day of her sentencing, Rose sat in the front row of the courtroom. When the judge read the guilty verdict, Rose stood up and walked toward Victoria. Instead of shouting or cursing her, she embraced her. "I forgive you," she whispered in her ear. "Not because you deserve it, but because forgiveness is what will allow me to live in peace for whatever time I have left with my son." Victoria collapsed in tears, but Rose was already walking toward Michael, who waited with open arms. Our story ends 1 year later, in the garden of the new house they bought together. Michael has planted vegetables, tomatoes, onions, lettuce, not to sell them, but to remember how destiny can turn something as simple as a cart of vegetables into a bridge to life's greatest miracle. Rose, now 65, but with the vitality of someone who can finally sleep peacefully, is teaching her son to make bread the traditional way. "Do you know why I always knew I would find you?" she says while kneading the dough. "Why, Mom?" "Because a mother recognizes her child, not just with her eyes or through blood. She recognizes him with her soul, and my soul never stopped searching for you." Michael hugs her from behind as she cooks, exactly as he used to do when he was a 5-year-old boy. The star-shaped birthmark on both their arms shines under the afternoon sunlight, not as a mysterious coincidence, but as proof that some bonds are truly unbreakable. "Thank you for never giving up, Mom. Thank you for coming home, little Mikey." So what do you think? What would you have done in Michael's place? Would you have forgiven Victoria? Would you have trusted Rose from the beginning? Tell us in the comments where you're watching this video from and what you thought of this story that reminds us that true love always finds its way back home. Hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this story with someone who needs to remember that it's never too late for justice and love to triumph over cruelty and lies. Because at the end of the day, true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts, but in the hugs we've lost and finally recovered, in tears that turn into smiles, and in the certainty that no matter how much time passes, a mother's heart will always recognize the beating of her child's heart. Until the next video.